The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council stretched endlessly above, its translucent walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that responded to the emotional tension filling the chamber. Thousands of alien delegates from across the galaxy sat in tiered sections, their various forms creating a living tapestry of scales, chitin, tentacles, and energy fields. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation and barely contained hostility. Ambassador Vexcool of the Draknari Empire dominated the central speaking platform, his towering 8-foot frame covered in midnight black exoskeleton that gleamed like polished obsidian. 4 crimson eyes, each the size of a human fist, surveyed the assembled delegates with predatory satisfaction. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a species that had conquered half the known galaxy through sheer brutality and overwhelming force. "Fellow council members," Vexcool began, his words resonating through bioacoustic amplifiers embedded in the chamber walls. "We gather today to address a problem that has festered too long. The human infestation spreads like a plague across our territories." A holographic display materialized above the assembly, showing the spiral arm of the galaxy where Earth resided. Red dots marked human colonies, each one a thorn in the side. They have established galactic powers. What had started as a handful of primitive settlements 50 years ago had grown into a network of thriving worlds that dared to exist without permission from their betters. Captain Lee Minho stood at the designated human podium, a small platform that seemed almost insulting in its modest size compared to the elaborate dais provided for major species. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death among the stars and emerged unchanged. His simple blue uniform bore no decorations save for the small Earth insignia on his collar, yet his presence commanded attention in a way that flashier displays could not. Behind him, the rest of the human delegation consisted of just 3 others: a gray-haired admiral whose cybernetic eye glowed softly blue, a young diplomatic aide clutching a data tablet, and a woman in civilian clothes whose identity remained carefully classified even from most of Earth's government. "Their colonies mock our territorial boundaries," Vexcool continued, his mandibles clicking with each emphasized word. "They mine asteroids we claimed millennia ago. They establish trade routes through space that belongs to the Empire. They even dare to defend themselves when we send correction fleets." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zenthari delegation, their crystalline bodies refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, nodded in unison. The massive Gorlak representatives, each one a living mountain of muscle and bone, growled their approval. Even the energy beings of the ethereal collective pulsed with synchronized irritation. "The solution is simple," Vexcool declared, spreading his 4 arms wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire assembly. "Immediate withdrawal from all disputed territories, complete cessation of independent military action, acknowledgement of Draknari supremacy in the Outer Rim sectors." The holographic display shifted, showing the deployment of the largest military force in recorded galactic history. 10,000 Draknari warships hung in perfect formation around their fortress world of Kithmaran, each vessel bristling with weapons capable of cracking planets. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons dominated the center of the formation, surrounded by clouds of smaller destroyers and frigates that moved like schools of metallic fish. "And if humanity refuses these reasonable terms?" Vexcool's 4 eyes focused on Minho with laser intensity. "Then you will face the full might of the Draknari fleet at the nexus point, 30 standard rotations from today. Bring everything you have, little mammals. Show the galaxy what your species can truly accomplish." The chamber held its collective breath as Minho stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was steady and calm, cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "We refuse." Chaos erupted. Delegates leaped to their feet, tentacles writhed in excitement, and the Gorlak contingent began what sounded suspiciously like a war chant. Through it all, Vexcool remained motionless, his expression unreadable. "Furthermore," Minho continued, waiting for the noise to die down, "we accept your challenge. Humanity will meet your fleet at the nexus point in 30 days. "Excellent," Vexcool purred, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile. if it hadn't revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. "How many ships will you bring?" 100. 500. "We are curious to see how large a funeral pyre your species requires." Minho straightened his uniform jacket with deliberate precision, his dark eyes never leaving the Draknari ambassador's face. When he spoke, his words carried clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. 1 ship. The silence that followed was so complete that the ambient hum of the chamber's life support systems seemed deafening. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed, no one dared to process what they had just heard. Then the laughter began. It started with a single Draknari officer in the observer's gallery, a sharp bark of disbelief that echoed off the crystal walls. Within seconds, it spread like wildfire through the entire assembly. The Zenthari's crystalline bodies chimed like wind bells as they shook with mirth. The Gorlak contingent's laughter sounded like grinding stone. Even the normally reserved energy beings of the ethereal collective flickered with patterns that could only indicate amusement. Vexkul himself began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. His 4 eyes literally wept with the force of his amusement as he doubled over, his massive frame shaking with each guffaw. 1 ship, he gasped between fits of laughter. "Did you hear that? The mammals think 1 ship can face 10,000. Their arrogance knows no bounds." The laughter continued for nearly 5 minutes, washing over the human delegation in waves of derision and contempt. Through it all, Minho remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged, waiting with the patience of someone who knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. Finally, Vexkul managed to compose himself, wiping moisture from his eyes with a gesture that somehow managed to be both elegant and threatening. "Very well, Captain Lee Minho of the Terran Defense Force. 1 ship against 10,000. The nexus point in 30 rotations. Do not disappoint us by failing to arrive." Minho offered a slight bow, just deep enough to show respect for the Council's authority while maintaining his dignity. 30 days, Ambassador. 1 ship. As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, the laughter followed them down the corridors like a pack of hunting beasts. But if anyone had looked closely at the classified woman in civilian clothes, they might have noticed that she was not laughing at all. Instead, Dr. Kim So-young was calculating exactly how much exotic matter would be needed to demonstrate why humanity had stopped building large fleets 50 years ago. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes 1 was more than enough. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every civilized world. On 1,000 different planets, in cantinas and spaceports and military academies, beings of every conceivable species gathered around holographic displays to witness what they believed would be the final chapter of human arrogance. On the crystal, spires of New Zenthari, ethereal beings of living light flickered with amusement as they shared the news through their collective consciousness. Their harmonious voices rang like chimes as they discussed the amusing little mammals who thought 1 ship could challenge the greatest military force in galactic history. In the methane storms of Gorlak Minor, the massive stone-skinned warriors paused their endless training to watch the broadcasts on plasma screens mounted to their fortress walls. Their booming laughter shook the very foundations as they placed bets on how quickly the human vessel would be vaporized. But nowhere was the mockery more intense than on Draknari Prime itself, the obsidian throne world of the Empire that had conquered 1/3 of the galaxy through pure military might. Commander Thokvar stood in the war room of the Imperial Strategic Command, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically at the massive holographic display dominating the chamber. Around him, junior officers and military analysts from a dozen different species that served the Draknari Empire watched with rapt attention as he dissected human military capabilities with surgical precision. "Observe," Thokvar declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally destroyed 17 worlds, the pathetic state of human military technology. The hologram shifted to display a captured human dreadnought, the UES Titan, its hull scarred from a recent skirmish with Draknari patrol vessels. Technical specifications scrolled alongside the rotating image, each number more underwhelming than the last. "Primitive fusion drives that barely achieve 0.7 light speed. Thokvar sneered, his mandibles clicking with disdain. Energy shielding so weak that our scout ships could penetrate it with mining lasers. And their weapons. He paused, for dramatic effect. Kinetic projectile systems. They literally throw pieces of metal at their enemies. The assembled officers erupted in laughter. A young Draknari lieutenant raised one of his clawed hands. Commander, surely they must have some hidden capabilities? Some advanced technology they've kept secret? Thokvar's 4 eyes glowed with cruel amusement. Lieutenant Kexmore, we have been monitoring human communications for decades. Their own scientists publish research papers detailing their technological limitations. They debate the theoretical possibility of faster-than-light communication while we have been using quantum entanglement networks for millennia. The hologram changed again, showing the largest human vessel ever constructed, a massive dreadnought that had taken Earth's combined shipyards 3 years to complete. Their largest warship, Thokvar continued, masses 800,000 tons. Our escort frigates, our smallest combat vessels, mass over 2 million tons each. A single Draknari destroyer could obliterate their entire fleet. More laughter filled the chamber as junior officers shared the recordings with their colleagues across the Empire. Within hours, the analysis would be broadcast on every military frequency, ensuring that every Draknari warrior knew exactly how pathetic their opponents truly were. But 8,000 light-years away in the hidden orbital shipyards floating in the shadow of Earth's moon, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. Director Park Jisoo stood behind 3 meters of reinforced transparasteel, watching as the final components of humanity's greatest secret were installed with microscopic precision. The construction bay stretched for kilometers in every direction, its walls lined with fabrication units that had been working continuously for 5 years to create something that had never existed before. The ship designated UES Baekdu hung suspended in the center of the bay like a silver needle against the starfield beyond. At first glance, it appeared almost disappointingly ordinary. A sleek, streamlined hull without visible weapon ports or the massive engine arrays that characterized traditional warships. Its surface was smooth as polished mirror, reflecting the work lights of thousands of automated construction drones that swarmed around it like mechanical insects. Chief Engineer Kim Hyejin approached with a data tablet clutched in her trembling hands, her face pale with the weight of what they had created. At 28, she was the youngest department head in Earth's military history, chosen not for her experience but for her ability to think in ways that conventional physics said were impossible. The exotic matter containment systems are online, she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. Quantum field generators are stable. The reality anchor it's actually working. Jisoo nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the vessel that represented humanity's desperate gamble. Are we certain about this? Once we activate the drive, there's no going back. Every species in the galaxy will know what we're capable of. Hyejin's hands stopped trembling as she made her choice. Director, I've run the calculations 10,000 times. The math is solid. We're not just bending the laws of physics. We're rewriting them entirely. Through the transparasteel, they could see Captain Choi Min-jae floating in a maintenance pod near the ship's command section, personally inspecting every system that would keep him alive during humanity's most desperate hour. At 32, he had volunteered for a mission that would either save his species or ensure their complete annihilation. The Baekdu's hull bore no visible weapons because it didn't need them. Hidden within its core was something far more terrifying than any cannon or missile, a device that could temporarily disconnect matter from the fundamental forces that defined reality itself. 100 years of theoretical physics condensed into a mechanism no larger than a shuttle bay. The Draknari think we're primitive, Jisoo said quietly, watching as the final calibrations were completed. They measure strength by the size of guns and the thickness of armor. They've never considered that the ultimate weapon might be the ability to simply edit the universe. 8,000 light-years away, in the empty space designated as the Nexus Point, the Draknari Armada was already assembling. 10,000 warships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation, their hulls gleaming like black stars against The cosmic void. Each vessel bristled with enough firepower to sterilize a planet, their combined might sufficient to crack moons and boil oceans. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities formed the core of the formation, their massive hulls studded with weapon batteries that could fire streams of antimatter across interplanetary distances. Around them, destroyers and cruisers moved in precise patterns, their formations so perfect they seemed like living metal organisms swimming through space. Admiral Grokthul stood on the bridge of his flagship, the World Render, watching his tactical displays with satisfaction. Each green dot represented a vessel under his command, each one crewed by warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. Together, they represented the most powerful military force ever assembled in galactic history. "Admiral," reported his censor. "Officer," a young Draknari whose 3 eyes glowed with excitement. "Long-range scouts report no human fleet movements in any adjacent sectors. Their entire navy appears to be concentrated around their home system." Grokthul's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Cowering behind their homeworld's defenses, no doubt. When their single ship arrives, if it arrives, we will give them a demonstration. They will never forget." But as the Draknari celebrated their inevitable victory and the galaxy mocked humanity's suicidal arrogance, none of them understood what was actually approaching through the darkness between stars. The UES Bekdu moved through space like a silver ghost, its exotic drive systems bending space-time itself to achieve velocities that should have been impossible. Inside its pristine corridors, Captain Minjay reviewed his final orders one last time, knowing that in 72 hours, the galaxy would learn that humanity had stopped building large fleets for a very simple reason. When you could manipulate reality itself, quantity became irrelevant. The greatest joke in galactic history was about to reveal its punchline, and no one would be laughing when it was over. The bridge of the World Render stretched like a cathedral of war, its obsidian walls lined with tactical displays that showed the positions of 10,000 Draknari warships. Each vessel hung in space like a predatory beast, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. Admiral Grokthul stood at the center of it all, his massive form dominating the command platform as he surveyed his armada with the satisfaction of a hunter who had cornered his prey. The Nexus Point itself was a region of space chosen specifically for its strategic importance, a crossroads where 3 major trade routes intersected, far enough from any inhabited system that the coming battle wouldn't accidentally destroy innocent worlds. Here, surrounded by the swirling colors of distant nebulae and the cold light of alien stars, the fate of humanity would be decided. Around the flagship, the Draknari fleet maintained perfect formation. Massive dreadnoughts formed the core, each one a floating fortress, bristling with antimatter cannons and planet cracker missiles. Sleek destroyers prowled the perimeter like hunting wolves, their sensor arrays constantly sweeping space for any sign of approaching human forces. Between them, clouds of smaller frigates and corvettes moved in precise patterns, ready to swarm any enemy that dared approach. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Vexthal from the sensor station, his 3 eyes focused intently on his displays. "Long-range scanners show no sign of human fleet movement in any adjacent sectors. Are we certain they're actually coming?" Grokthul's mandibles clicked with amusement. Perhaps they've finally realized the futility of their situation. Maybe they— "Sir." The sensor operator's voice cracked with excitement. "Contact detected. Bearing 27 Mark IV approaching from the Sol vector." Every head on the bridge turned toward the main tactical display as a single red dot appeared at the edge of sensor range, moving steadily toward the center of the Draknari formation. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the contact's course projected directly through the heart of their armada. "Just one contact?" Grokthul asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Confirmed, sir. Single vessel, mass approximately 50,000 tons. No escort, no support fleet detected." A wave of laughter rippled through the bridge crew. Officers exchanged incredulous glances, their expressions shifting from anticipation to outright mockery. Even the normally disciplined warriors couldn't contain their amusement at the spectacle unfolding before them. "Display the vessel on main screen," Grokthul commanded, settling back in his command throne to enjoy what promised to be the most entertaining moment of his military career. The massive view screen at the front of the bridge flickered to life, showing a magnified image of the approaching human ship. The UES Baekdu appeared as little more than a silver needle against the star field, its hull smooth and unmarked by the weapon ports and armor plating that characterize serious military vessels. It moved through space with an almost casual grace, showing no signs of the desperation or fear that should have characterized a suicide mission. That's it? Grokthul's laughter boomed through the bridge, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of pure disbelief. That pathetic little courier vessel is humanity's great champion. The bridge erupted in alien voices as officers shared the joke with their colleagues throughout the fleet. Within minutes, the image of the tiny human ship was being transmitted to every vessel in the armada, generating waves of laughter that rippled through the Draknari formation like a viral infection. "Open a communication channel," Grokthul ordered, wiping moisture from his eyes as he struggled to compose himself. "Let's hear what these mammals have to say for themselves." The main screen shifted from the external view to show the interior of the human vessel's bridge. The space was surprisingly modest, with clean white walls and simple control stations that looked almost primitive compared to the baroque complexity of Draknari technology. At the center stood a young human male in a plain blue uniform, his dark hair neatly trimmed and his expression utterly calm despite facing impossible odds. "This is Captain Choi Min-jae of the UES Baekdu," the human said, his voice carrying clearly across the communication link. "I'm here to discuss the terms of your surrender." The silence that followed was so complete that the background hum of the bridge's life support systems seemed deafening. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed, no one could quite process what they had just heard. Then the laughter exploded like a supernova. Officers doubled over their control stations, their bodies shaking with mirth that bordered on hysteria. The communications officer fell backward in his chair, his tentacles writhing with uncontrolled amusement. Even the ship's artificial intelligence seemed to join in, as status displays flickered with what could only be interpreted as electronic laughter. Grokthul himself was laughing so hard that tears streamed down his scaled cheeks, his massive frame convulsing with each guffaw. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was hoarse from the effort. "Surrender," he gasped, gesturing wildly at the tactical display that showed his 10,000 ships surrounding the single human vessel. "You face the greatest armada in galactic history, with one unarmed courier ship, and you speak of surrender." Throughout the fleet, similar scenes played out on 1,000 different bridges. Draknari warriors who had conquered worlds shared the kiss joke with their subordinates. Automated defense systems actually shut down briefly as their operators became too distracted by laughter to maintain proper vigilance. But on the screen, Captain Min-jae's expression never changed. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, waiting with the patience of someone who knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. "Admiral," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk, "appearances can be deceiving. I suggest you scan our vessel more carefully before you make any assumptions about our capabilities." Something in the human's tone caused Grokthul's laughter to die in his throat. There was no fear there, no desperation, no sign of someone facing certain death. Instead, there was something that looked disturbingly like confidence. "Scan that ship," he ordered impatiently, gesturing toward his sensor officer. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know what tricks these mammals think they're playing." Lieutenant Vexthal bent over his console, his clawed fingers dancing across holographic controls as he directed the flagship's most powerful sensors toward the human vessel. For a moment, the readings appeared normal. Fusion drive, basic shielding, minimal life support for a crew of perhaps 20 beings. Then his three eyes widened in shock, and his confident expression melted into confusion. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the readings, they don't make sense. The ship's energy signature is completely impossible." "What do you mean, impossible?" Grokthul demanded, his amusement rapidly fading. "Admiral, according to these scans, the vessel's power core is generating more energy than our entire fleet combined. But that can't be right. There's no reactor design in the galaxy capable of that kind of output. And the quantum field fluctuations..." He paused, his claws trembling as he recalibrated his instruments. "Sir, space-time itself is bending around. That ship!" A chill ran down Grokthul's spine as he stared at the innocent-looking human vessel on his screen. For the first time in his military career, he was beginning to suspect that he might have made a terrible mistake. On the communication screen, Captain Minje smiled for the first time since the conversation began, and somehow that simple expression was more terrifying than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Choi Minje stood perfectly still on the bridge of the UES Baekdu, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed through the main viewport at the most terrifying sight in galactic history. 10,000 Draknari warships surrounded his single vessel like a metallic constellation, their hulls gleaming with the reflected light of distant stars. Each one bristled with enough firepower to crack planets, yet Minje's expression remained as calm as if he were reviewing morning reports in Earth's orbital headquarters. Behind him, Lieutenant Seo Yunhae worked at a control station that looked nothing like the rest of the ship's technology. Where other consoles displayed simple holographic readouts, hers showed impossible geometries that seemed to hurt the eyes if stared at too long. Streams of exotic matter flowed through transparent conduits like liquid starlight, contained by magnetic fields so precise they had to be adjusted 1 billion times per second to prevent catastrophic failure. The bridge itself was surprisingly peaceful, with only 5 crew members total manning stations that controlled humanity's most dangerous secret. Through the reinforced viewports, they could see the Draknari fleet maintaining perfect attack formation, their weapons trained on the small human vessel with mechanical precision. "Admiral Grokthul," Minje spoke into the communication system, his voice carrying the same conversational tone he might use to discuss the weather. "Your species has ruled this galaxy through fear and superior numbers for over 3,000 years. Your military doctrine is flawless, your technology impressive, your warriors without equal." On the main screen, Admiral Grokthul's 4 eyes narrowed with suspicion. Around him, the World Render's bridge crew watched nervously as their sensor readings continued to display impossible energy signatures from the human vessel. "But you've made one critical error in your calculations," Minje continued, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the viewport. "You assumed that bigger fleets automatically meant better weapons. You measured strength by counting ships and comparing firepower ratings. You never considered that the ultimate weapon might not be a gun at all." As if responding to his words, the UES Baekdu began to emit a sound that shouldn't have been possible in the vacuum of space. It started as a low harmonic frequency that seemed to vibrate through the hulls of every ship in the area, transmitted not through air, but through the fabric of space-time itself. The resonance bypassed conventional physics entirely, carrying directly into the quantum foam that underlied reality. On every Draknari vessel, instrument panels erupted in cascades of warning lights, sensors designed to detect incoming missiles. Hand energy beams suddenly screamed alerts about phenomena they had no names for. Gravity detectors registered fluctuations that suggested massive objects were appearing and disappearing in empty space. Quantum field monitors displayed readings that violated the fundamental laws of physics. "What trickery is this?" Admiral Grokthul demanded, his voice cracking slightly as he watched his tactical displays dissolve into chaos. "What are you doing to our systems?" Lieutenant Seo Yunhai looked up from her impossible console, her young face pale but determined. At 26, she was the youngest person ever trusted with humanity's most classified technology, chosen not for her military experience, but for her ability to think in mathematical concepts that had no names in any language. "Captain," she reported quietly, "exotic matter containment is stable. Quantum field generators are synchronized. The reality anchor is fully operational and awaiting your command." Minje nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the enemy fleet that surrounded them. "Admiral, what you're experiencing isn't trickery, it's pure physics, just physics that your species never imagined possible." He turned slightly toward Lieutenant Seo, his voice carrying clearly across the bridge's pristine. "Silence. Demonstration protocol, Lieutenant. Minimum yield. I want them to understand what they're dealing with." Uni's fingers moved across her control interface with practiced precision, touching holographic displays that showed the fundamental structure of reality itself. Mathematics streamed across her screens, equations that described how matter and energy related to the underlying quantum fields that gave them meaning. "Initiating reality anchor deployment," she announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to unleash. "Target area, empty space, 1 kilometer off our starboard bow. Duration, 0.5 seconds. Yield, minimal localized." Effect: a kilometer away from the human ship, in a region of space that contained nothing but vacuum and distant starlight, something impossible began to happen. Space itself started to fold. It began as a barely visible distortion, like heat shimmer, rising from hot pavement on a summer day. But instead of air rising, it was the very fabric of reality that was bending, twisting into geometric shapes that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal three-dimensional space. The distortion grew larger, more pronounced, as the exotic matter aboard the Bekdu interacted with the quantum fields that defined the boundaries between existing and not existing. Matter and energy in the affected region began to behave according to rules that had never applied anywhere in the known universe. Photons traveling through the area suddenly forgot which direction they had been going. Gravitational fields twisted back on themselves in impossible loops. The electromagnetic spectrum folded into configurations that created colors no living being had ever seen. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the distortion snapped back to normal reality. Where a cubic kilometer of space had existed moments before, there was now simply nothing. Not vacuum. Vacuum still contained quantum fields and virtual particles and the fundamental forces that held reality together. This was something far more profound. A perfectly spherical void, where the concept of existence itself had been temporarily revoked. The sphere hung in space like a hole cut in the universe, its edges so perfectly defined that they seemed to slice through the background star field like a cosmic scalpel. Light from distant stars simply stopped at its boundary, neither reflecting nor refracting, but simply ceasing to exist, as if it had never been created at all. For 30 seconds, the Draknari fleet stared at this impossible sight in complete silence. 10,000 warships, crewed by millions of warriors who had conquered half the galaxy, floated motionless as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. "We call it a reality anchor," Captain Minji explained conversationally, as if he were describing a new type of engine or communication system. "The technology temporarily disconnects matter and energy from the fundamental forces that define their existence. For a brief moment, we essentially edit the universe itself, removing selected portions from the equation that describes reality." The spherical void began to fade as normal space-time gradually reasserted itself, quantum fields slowly refilling the gap like water flowing into a hole. But the memory of that perfect emptiness lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Admiral Grogthal's voice, when it finally came through the communication system, was barely above a whisper. "Impossible. The laws of physics, they cannot be violated." "You're absolutely right, Admiral," Minje replied with a slight smile. "The laws of physics cannot be violated, but they can be temporarily suspended if you know how to ask politely." He gestured toward the fading void where a piece of space-time had briefly ceased to exist. "Your 10,000 ships represent 3,000 years of military evolution, the finest application of conventional physics that your civilization has ever achieved. Antimatter weapons, gravitational manipulators, planet-cracking missiles. All of it built on the assumption that the universe plays by consistent rules." The captain's expression grew more serious as he continued, "Our one ship represents something entirely different. It's not bigger or faster or more heavily armed than your vessels. Instead, it carries the ability to change the rules themselves. When you can edit reality at the quantum level, questions of firepower and armor become somewhat irrelevant." Throughout the Draknari fleet, similar conversations were taking place on 1,000 different bridges as officers tried to explain to their crews what they had just witnessed. But how do you describe the indescribable? How do you plan a military response to an enemy who can simply decide that your weapons don't exist? The greatest armada in galactic history hung motionless in space, its crews finally beginning to understand that they were not facing just another enemy fleet. They were confronting a species that had learned to weaponize the universe itself. The crystalline dome of the Galactic Council chamber had never hosted an emergency session quite like this one. Within 6 hours of Admiral Grochthal's fleet transmitting their unconditional surrender, representatives from every major species in the galaxy had gathered with unprecedented urgency. The same chamber that had echoed with mocking laughter just weeks before now hummed with nervous whispers and fearful speculation. Ambassador Sumin walked through corridors that seemed entirely different from the ones that had witnessed humanity's humiliation. Where before alien delegates had barely acknowledged her species' existence, now they stepped aside respectfully as she passed. Zenthari energy beings dimmed their luminescence in deference. Massive Gorlak warriors actually bowed, their stone-like heads. Even the arrogant ethereal collective pulsed with subdued patterns that indicated something approaching respect. The transformation was complete and absolute. Humanity had entered these halls as a minor nuisance to be crushed. They were returning as the single most powerful force the galaxy had ever witnessed. As Sumin took her place at the human podium, now repositioned to the center of the chamber floor, rather than relegated to the obscure side platform, she could feel thousands of alien eyes tracking her every movement. The silence was so complete that the bioacoustic systems amplified even the soft rustle of her diplomatic robes. "Esteemed delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast chamber, "the events at Nexus Point have demonstrated that the old patterns of galactic governance are no longer sustainable." On the massive holographic display above the assembly, footage from the demonstration played in perfect clarity. The image of that impossible sphere of nothingness, where space-time itself had briefly ceased to exist, caused visible shudders throughout the alien audience. Several Draknari delegates actually covered their eyes, unable to watch their military supremacy dissolve into cosmic horror. The Terran Confederation comes before you today not as conquerors, but as partners in building a new framework for interstellar civilization, Sumin continued. "We propose 3 fundamental changes to galactic law." She gestured, and the hologram shifted to display star charts showing territorial boundaries that had remained unchanged for millennia. Red zones marked areas of constant conflict where stronger species had crushed weaker ones through pure military force. First, the immediate and permanent cessation of all territorial expansion through military conquest. No species shall claim another's worlds through force of arms. Disputes will be resolved through negotiation, arbitration, and mutual agreement. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. For species like the Draknari, whose entire culture was built on military dominance, this represented a fundamental challenge to their way of life. Second, the establishment of neutral trade zones accessible to all species, regardless of military strength or political affiliation. Commerce will be based on merit and mutual benefit, not on who has the biggest guns. The hologram changed again, showing shipping routes that had been monopolized by major powers, while smaller species were forced to pay crushing tribute fees for basic necessities. Third, the formation of a joint peacekeeping force with rotating leadership, drawn from all member species. No single empire will hold permanent military authority over others. Ambassador Vexkul, who had seemed so confident and predatory just weeks before, now hunched in his obsidian throne like a broken creature. His 4 eyes, once bright with cruel intelligence, now darted nervously between the human delegate and the images of impossible technology playing above their heads. "And if we refuse these terms?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sumin's expression remained perfectly neutral, but somehow that very neutrality carried more menace than any threat could have conveyed. "The UES Bekdu remains stationed at Nexus Point, Ambassador. Captain Minje has been authorized to provide additional demonstrations of our capabilities should they be required." The silence that followed was profound. Every delegate in the chamber understood exactly what that simple statement meant. They had seen what humanity could do with a minimal display of their reality-altering technology. The thought of witnessing a full-scale demonstration was enough to turn even the most warlike species pale with terror. "I call for an immediate vote," announced the council moderator, an ancient wise one whose species had remained neutral for 10,000 years. All in favor of accepting the Terran proposals? The response was immediate and unanimous. Every hand, tentacle, appendage, and energy field in the chamber signaled agreement. Even the proud Draknari delegation voted yes, their military pride finally broken by the realization that they faced an enemy against whom conventional warfare was not just futile, but meaningless. 6 months later, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Director Park Jisoo stood in her expanded office, overlooking the orbital shipyards that had once hidden humanity's greatest secret. Through the reinforced transparent steel windows, she could see construction, bays that now stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. But instead of warships, these facilities were building something entirely different. A dozen vessels similar to the UES Baekdu hung in various stages of completion, but their purposes had nothing to do with warfare. These new reality anchor ships were designed for exploration, terraforming, and peaceful construction projects that would have been impossible using conventional technology. In Bay 7, the UES Sejong was being fitted with equipment that could literally reshape planetary surfaces by temporarily editing the laws of physics that governed geological processes. Bay 12 housed the UES Dasan, designed to explore regions of space where normal matter couldn't survive by creating protective reality bubbles around itself. Most remarkably, these construction projects were no longer exclusively human endeavors. Zenthari engineers worked alongside human physicists, their energy-based physiology allowing them to interact directly with exotic matter fields. Gorlak construction crews used their massive strength to install components that would have required heavy machinery for human workers. Even reformed Draknari scientists contributed their expertise in advanced metallurgy and weapons systems, though now those systems were being converted for peaceful purposes. Captain Choi Min-jae's voice crackled through the communication system, transmitted from his new command aboard a deep space exploration vessel. Director Jisoo, I'm pleased to report that the Galactic Council has unanimously approved humanity's proposal for the Deep Space Exploration Initiative. Apparently, they're quite eager to see what other impossible things we might discover out there. Through her window, Jisoo could see alien shuttles arriving hourly, bringing representatives from species that had never before shown interest in human technology. They came not as conquerors or overlords, but as students hoping to learn from the species that had weaponized reality itself, and then chosen to turn those weapons into tools of creation. The Vorthak Empire, once humanity's greatest threat, had requested joint research agreements to develop new terraforming techniques. The Ethereal Collective wanted to study how reality anchors might be used to explore dimensions beyond normal spacetime. Even species that had never before contacted Earth were sending delegations with offers of cooperation and alliance. The greatest joke in galactic history, Jisoo mused to herself, remembering the laughter that had followed humanity's promise to send one ship. The aliens had mocked what they saw as impossible arrogance. They had expected to witness the extinction of another upstart species. Instead, they had learned that sometimes one was not just enough. It was everything. Below her office, in the Po, research laboratories that had once developed humanity's most terrible weapon, scientists from 100 different worlds worked together on projects that would reshape the galaxy, not through conquest or destruction, but through the simple revolutionary idea that the universe's rules were suggestions rather than commands. The galaxy had laughed when humanity sent one ship. Now they were standing in line to join humanity's greatest adventure, the exploration of what became possible when you stopped accepting limitations and started rewriting reality itself. The end.